I've been sitting here for about 10 minutes trying to think of some witty way to begin this video, but I gotta be honest with you guys, I honestly got nothing. All you really need to know is the video I'm covering is called How Homer's Depression Helped Him Find God, and begins like this.
The goal of this video is to try and get as many people as possible watching this to believe in God.
With that said, before we begin, I should give this disclaimer. I am an atheist. However, my issue, as expressed in this video, is not with theism, nor even Christianity, but with the video I'm covering. If you are of any religious persuasion, it is my hope that you will enjoy this video and find the arguments I make against the claims that I am listening to be compelling. Lastly, I ask you to remember to not be offended unless you are an offender. If you do not subscribe to the claims that are made in the video I am covering, then I am not criticizing your belief system.
Because trust me, life is much better when you do.
Under what metric exactly? Can I see your source for this? It should also be noted that the quality of life of the people who believe something actually has very little to do with if you should believe in it or not. For example, psychologists have long recognized that people who have actual delusions have a higher quality of life than people who don't. But obviously this is not an argument for us to all adopt delusions. Anyway, I'll be skipping most of the next several minutes as he gives some platitudes before doing a recap of the Simpsons episode Hello Gutter, Hello Fatter, which I don't really have much to say about, minus a handful of parts, such as this.
You wonder why Homer doesn't have enough confidence in himself and in God to find something better.
Homer lacks confidence in sunshine. Homer lacks confidence in rain. Homer lacks confidence that spring will come again.
For some reason, he believes he has to put up with this nonsense.
Well, because off the top of my head, as it was pointed out by Frank Grimes in the episode Homer's Enemy, Homer is actually incredibly lucky to have had it as good as he has in life, so why would he attempt to push his luck farther?
God, I've had to work hard every day of my life, and what do I have to show for it? This briefcase and this haircut! And what do you have to show for your lifetime of sloth and ignorance?
What?
Everything! A dream house, 2 cars, a beautiful wife, a son who owns a factory, fancy clothes, and lobsters for dinner. And do you deserve any of it? No!
What are you saying?
I'm saying you're what's wrong with America, Simpson. You coast through life, you do as little as possible, and you leech off decent, hard-working people, like me. If you lived in any other country in the world, you'd have starved to death long ago.
He's got you there, Dad.
A more in-universe explanation can be found in And Maggie Makes 3, where we see a flashback of Homer quitting his job at the power plant and getting a job at a bowling alley, before being forced to go back to it after Marge gets pregnant with Maggie. This is the episode with the famous Do It For Her plaque, which quite literally shows he only still does this job because he has to support 3 children.
By the grace of God, he is saved by some guy doing a bungee jump.
That guy has a name, you know. He's Otto Man, a recurring character, and the bus driver for Springfield Elementary.
You see, I already knew going into this video that I wasn't going to be able to convince everyone watching this that God is real, that Jesus is real, because usually what skeptics and atheists require is some kind of scientific evidence.
How often atheists, both old and new, will say something like, well, where's your evidence for God? If you imagine God as one more big contingent thing among others, well then there's no evidence for that reality. They're operating out of a scientific framework. But see, if you're looking for God that way, you'll never find him. That's not what he is. God is the sheer act of existence itself, in and through which all particular things exist. But people get caught up in misunderstanding God and therefore seeking him in a sort of empirical, scientific way. That's not going to work.
Okay, well, what does it mean to be existence itself? You don't explain in any way, you just play a clip saying that without any further elaboration. This doesn't make any sense. Ah, but silly me, the text he puts on screen says that God doesn't have to make sense. Which begs the question why a being who is fundamentally illogical, or at the very least is not bogged down by our understanding of logicality, would create a universe that is logical. Seriously, what this argument comes down to is the idea that everything about this universe is fundamentally logical, except for the force behind it, which is, in of itself, incredibly illogical. I also want to talk about this paragraph from the quote that was put on screen real quick. Christ was sacrificed according to Christianity so God could, if I may borrow a phrase from Shane Killian, sacrifice himself to himself and remove the sins of humanity. It was done for a very specific purpose, and unless you want to make the argument that all suffering on earth is done for a purpose, then it just can't be compared to normal everyday suffering. I should know that I did go back and read the article that was being quoted from, that being Faith That Defies Logic by Tim Calcara. And it included this bit that I just felt the need to comment on because of how little sense it makes. I love this quote from A.W. Tozar's The Pursuit of God that gives us a hint as to why we might suffer. It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply. This quote is helpful when life doesn't seem to make sense. God is interested in our character, in fact so interested that he is willing to allow us to suffer so that our faith is perfected. Apparently, suffering is the only way to get the good stuff of a more genuine faith. I'll ignore the minor grammatical errors and the fact that you got the book Tozar said this in wrong. He actually said it in Glorify His Name, the root of the righteous, not the pursuit of God. And instead point out that this article is based on the notion that suffering is causing people to turn away from God. So God gives us suffering, which is causing us to turn away from Him so we can perfect our faith in Him? What kind of sense does that make? Oh, right, it doesn't have to make sense. God, that's such a great cop-out, isn't it?
In the scriptures, for example, Jesus is a miracle worker. He's able to do the impossible, feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and walking on water. Also, if for whatever reason you need additional proof, the history is there. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to deny the facts.
So what is, in your mind, the fastest way to disarm a mythicist?
So say, yeah, but you're a Christian. Okay, Bart Ehrman, an atheist New Testament scholar. Bart Ehrman gives 15 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus within 100 years. Now, 100 years is actually kind of strict, but it's a nice, narrow parameter for saying Jesus lived. 100, and here's an atheist, 100 years time, 15 different sources evidencing Jesus' death. If he died, he had to have lived.
Okay, this part just confuses me, and not just because he went from saying that obviously we could not logically conclude the existence of God to saying that there is actually a method which we could use that would lead us to the logical conclusion of God existing. But instead, I just want to point out that his example of something that can totally be verified is that Jesus Christ existed. While I won't sit here and say that no atheist denies the existence of Christ as a historical figure, it is a rather fringe position. As said by Gary Habermas in this same video you are currently showing a clip of.
And as Bart Ehrman says, he knows of nobody, no accredited specialist in the field of religion, no matter how liberal or how atheist or whatever, none of them who will have university, college, or seminary positions, none of them teach that Jesus never lived. The guys who teach it and claim to be scholars are people who don't have accredited degrees. He said with 2 exceptions, is Bart's count. The rest do not have accredited degrees, and none of them have university positions.
Most atheists don't dispute the existence of Christ. What they dispute is the accuracy of the Gospels. That's a very different thing. You gave an example of one such aspect of the Gospels that atheists deny with the feeding of 5,000, before saying that there is evidence out there if you want to see it, and then going on to show evidence of an entirely different claim that, and I cannot stress this enough, most people don't argue against.
She both metaphorically and literally slaps some sense into him that he actually does have not only someone, but a whole family that cares about him. I believe that's similar to how God feels about all of us. I'm not saying I don't get dark and lonely days, but I've noticed part of the reason why people are afraid to believe and live for God is because they believe God is angry at them, doesn't care about them, and won't forgive them for something shameful they did.
So they don't believe in God because they believe that God, who they don't believe in, won't forgive them for bad things they did. That doesn't make any sense.
In conclusion, God wants us to love one another and to live with purpose, not just for numbers, validation, and status, because the only validation that ultimately matters is His validation, not validation from people. Now, it's not just about believing this, it's about living like it. Actions speak louder than words. We should live and love for something greater than ourselves. God is literally the equivalent to love. So I like to think anyway, where there is love, there is God. This is proof that God is with us wherever we go.
Really? Out of sheer curiosity, does that include the love a victim of Stockholm Syndrome might feel for their captor? How about the love a deranged stalker might feel for their victim? Yeah, these platitudes sound a lot less nice when you apply them to reality, don't they? Anyway, final thoughts? This was the first commentary edited on my new laptop, which I am really liking so far. Good night and good luck.